Hey everybody, welcome to Geeksvana Live. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. This is actually our second video of the day. Two very different DJI related videos. Our first one is actually the DJI Neo UK drone rules, just explain the basics for new users in terms of what you need to know rule-wise. And this one, of course, is talking about a different kind of legislation relating to DJI, of course, which is going to be an interesting chat. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. I really do appreciate it. Tonight, we're going to be joined by Graham for the main chat after the story part has been put through. So we'll jump straight into that. And the United States of America have been grappling, I think is a good description for it, with legislation for some time now around this particular issue. Early efforts during previous years were usually disregarded as really fringe attempts from politicians and commissioners looking to forward a general anti-Chinese agenda, but certainly we didn't really think a lot of the early stuff was very much discounted and was really, it never felt like it was actually going to go anywhere. The more recent legislation focused has been, of course, on HR 2864, which we do have here to bring up a few times as it's needed. The Countering CCP Drones Act, and of course, via the NDAA or the National Defense Authorization Act. That's really been the two areas where it's been this anti-DJI sort of rhetoric has been put forward. The latter was seemingly the one with the most traction and went through committee stages and the House fairly quickly. Of course, the NDAA is a larger, regular piece of legislation that comes about once a year, dealing with the defense needs of the USA. I need to unplug an electronic device in the corner there. And as with so many large acts of that type, the verbiage is added in there to deal with smaller acts like 2864, essentially piggybacking the larger acts. So you end up with this legislation being part of that larger legislation. The latest news, however, is that HR 2864, a bill which is specific in that it seeks to enter DJI specifically on the FCC covered list, that has now passed the House via a voice vote yesterday. This is a significant step forward for the legislation and now means it moves on to the Senate, who have previously agreed at committee level the same verbiage, but of course in the NDAA. Now, that doesn't mean by any stretch of the imagination that this is guaranteed a pass, and I've seen some attitudes change and public references to the larger scale campaign for end users to contact their senators to voice concern over the effective ban have actually had some impact. There have also been a couple of major players stepping out from the Senate to support this bill and even suggested introducing their own should it fail. So there's definitely a decent amount of pull from both sides, shall we say. Now, I want to pause here quickly to play a short clip from the politician who is pushing the legislation, Representative Alise Stepanics. This short clip is an excerpt from C-SPAN rebroadcast with permission.
The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise today in support of my bipartisan legislation, the Countering CCP Drones Act. First, I want to thank Chairwoman Cathy McMorris-Rodgers, Chairman Latta, Ranking Member Pallone, and the Energy and Commerce Committee for their bipartisan support of this legislation and others that seek to end Communist China's malign influence in America. Additionally, I want to thank my colleague, Majority Leader Scalise, for bringing these bills to the floor that clearly demonstrate that House Republicans will continue to lead in countering Communist China. The Chinese Communist Party is working to undermine American sovereignty by forcing Americans to rely and depend on unsecure communist Chinese technology. Nowhere is this more evident than in the drone industry. In 2015, the CCP launched the Made in China 2025 initiative, which leveraged aggressive subsidies, direct CCP investment, and unfair trade practices to artificially drive down the cost of Chinese manufactured drones, undercutting American companies and ensuring the rest of the world was forced to rely on Communist China for unsecured drone technology. Due to these authoritarian policies, America has been flooded with drones manufactured by CCP-controlled drone company DJI. Allowing artificially cheap DJI drones to monopolize our skies has decimated American drone manufacturing and given our greatest strategic adversary eyes in our skies. Over the last 7 years, the U.S. government has publicly confirmed time and time again that DJI drones are being used to collect information on U.S. critical infrastructure and pose significant risks to U.S. national security. Moreover, DJI is on the U.S. Department of Defense list of Chinese military companies because it directly advances the modernization efforts of the People's Liberation Army. Not only does DJI improve the equipment of our greatest strategic adversary, which could one day be used against U.S. service members, they also actively aid the CCP in carrying out genocidal crimes against ethnic minorities. It is past time we end Communist China's role as the world's drone factory. My legislation, the Countering CCP Drones Act, will place DJI on the FCC's covered list, which will prohibit new models of DJI drones from operating in America. This will initiate a much-needed transition period to improve the competitiveness of U.S. drone companies, remove Chinese spy drones from our skies, and end our reliance on CCP-manufactured drones. For too long, we have allowed Communist China leverage over our critical industries through their malign drone monopoly. As drones become increasingly integrated into our military, law enforcement, agriculture, and critical infrastructure, the U.S. must build our domestic manufacturing capabilities. Make no mistake, Communist China will use the successes of its Made in China 2025 initiative to undercut American global leadership and domestic security. We have 3 months to reverse the course of these successes. The passage of my Countering CCP Drones Act is a critical step in that direction. I urge all of my colleagues to join me in supporting this bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
So quite dramatic words there from the representative, and it's interesting as well hearing the narrative, the story that she is painting from the point of view that it seems quite dramatic, full stop. It seems very dramatic in terms of where we sit in the UK in the politics of drones and the politics of Chinese drones, etc. And it really does feel almost out of context. Certainly some of the things that she's saying, I feel quite strongly that in that way. Then we go to the following tile release from her X account, which I'll just pull up here. And this reads that the House of Representatives overwhelmingly passed my legislation, the Countering CCP Drones Act, to end the drone monopoly Communist China held in the US, protect our skies and build the US drone industrial base. For years, the US government has known that DJI presents unacceptable economic, is that word, and national security risks, but no one was willing to take necessary steps to remove communist Chinese spy drones from our skies. That changed today. It is strategically irresponsible to allow Communist China to be our drone factory. It is now critical that the Senate include this legislation in their National Defense Authorization Act. So, as you can see there, that is still the tactic, as it were, from the point of view that they want that to be seemingly it's the NDAA is the main attack point. Because again, I think with an election coming quite soon, I'm not sure in terms of getting 2864 onto the docket in the Senate and getting it through all the debate and everything else like that. I'm not entirely sure on committee and everything else. I'm not entirely sure they'll have enough time before the election. So it does look like she's still pushing for this to be part of the NDAA. So whilst you digest that a little bit, let's take a step back quickly and look at what this would mean for DJI drones in the USA. So being placed on the FCC covered list will stop the company from being able to gain new licenses for their products. As you will no doubt know, many of the leaks and the predictions of new DJI drones and products actually comes from FCC filings being released. Well, certainly pre the server scrape days in terms of leaks anyway. Any product using the US transmission network requires a license from the FCC. So without that license, you'll not be able to sell or use the drone legally within the USA, basically. One area that has been clarified, however, in the last 24 hours is that surrounding existing drones and DJI products already licensed by the FCC. although there is usually instructions coming from politicians to the FCC with any legislation of this type, giving the FCC the ability to review former licenses, Stepanic in her speech and releases now focuses on this being a ban for new products. To me, this is likely a slight change in the narrative, in the language, and certainly her direction, possibly even from the pressure created by the sheer number of drone users who've been contacting their US political representatives. But it also usually, this kind of thing comes from negotiation and discussion behind the scenes in terms of people wanting to stop there being objections, certainly in the House and between houses. It would be a real shock to the system to retroactively act on licenses and of course cause a deep financial hole for consumers and enterprise users. Stepanic now discusses this act in terms of being part of the strategy to switch to US-made products over time. For this, you need to look at things like the Drone for First Responders Act, the DFR, etc. We won't be focusing on that one here today, but it is all part of the same narrative now, where they're looking to essentially stop the reliance on Chinese drones through to actually switching to US companies once they've supposedly supported them to actually exist. So what next? Now the bill has passed the House, it would need to go to the Senate, although, as I say, it looks like they're now still focusing on the NDAA. This bill, much like most legislation, which is, shall we say, anti-Chinese, has had bipartisan support and passed without objection. So it really is utilizing that sort of anti-Chinese feeling that's there across the parties at the moment, certainly. If that cross-party support is transferred to the Senate, then it's likely the legislation will end up on the president's desk for signature one way or the other, either separately or with the NDAA. That all sounds rather easy, and there are lots of hurdles in terms of changes and challenges at Senate level and reconciliation, etc., to come yet. One thing you can almost guarantee with this particular legislation is that it will not go as quickly or as smoothly or perhaps even in the exact direction as anyone may think or fear. So far, it's been a true roller coaster in terms of actually seeing this through. So that's where we stand. Now, with the Geeksvana audience in the live chat, thank you again joining us in such high numbers. Please hit the like if you're watching. I would really appreciate it. And our co-host and editor, Graham Degg. I want to look at some of the talking points around this story and look at it from a UK perspective too, because I think that has quite an interesting story behind it. So let's pop across. And Graham, you're looking very blue this evening. How are you?
Good evening. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. It's not often I join in a transatlantic chat.
No, indeed.
So, yeah, it's great.
That's a very it's a nice shirt. It's not as dramatic. People were betting in the pre-show chat that it might be related to food and different things, and I think that's actually quite.
I think this one's subtle. This one's subtle, Sean. That's what this one is.
It's pretty subtle, isn't it? Really, it's nice. It's a nice shirt. So, it's also important.
Thank you to Deborah and Mike for sending it to me for my birthday.
Oh, was it a birthday present? It was Graham's birthday the weekend's just passed. So everybody wish him a happy birthday in the chat, please. But it's also important that just pull up this tile very quickly, which is the DJI Response, where they said DJI has been the drone of choice for public safety in the US for years, and with good reason. The reliability and robustness of DJI drone platforms have helped numerous public safety agencies save lives and keep first responders safe. Losing access to the best equipment available in the market means losing access to critical situational awareness in all forms of high-stakes situations, risking American lives, let alone what it does for inspections and for the consumer market as well. Are we not, as consumers, and consumer users, are we not allowed this kind of thing? So what's your, people have heard from me for a few minutes now, what with confirming the story, what's your general thoughts on this? Because it's one of the things that I'm really interested in, because you're not removed from this, but obviously we focus very heavily on the UK, you especially. What's your thoughts on this whole situation?
The whole Fortress UK, Fortress America, moving away from globalization. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of all parts of globalization, but it does allow for economies of scale, and DJI have got economies of scale. You'd think, listening to, I can't think of her name, and listening to the Alise there, that DJI were making these just for America. They're not. They're making them for the world. They've got huge economies of scale. and that enables them to build things cheaper. They may have had subsidies. There's nothing to stop America giving subsidies to their industry if they want to develop that industry.
Exactly.
So it seems a little bit. Sorry if there's any background noise
No
here.
problem,
I'm having
sir.
a shopping delivery. There are one of the problems that America will have building an industry to compete with DJI is the fact that they probably won't get the same economies of scale. They certainly won't, because they will almost certainly load on controls, if you like, non-tariff controls in the form of dual-use ITAR controls, that sort of thing, because these things, as we know from Ukraine, can be used as weapons, and therefore they won't have the export market that enables that the economies of scales that DJI enjoys.
No, exactly, and I think that those are some really good points. And you talk a lot about economy of scale and everything else there, and also the word the word economy is starting to come into these statements now, whereas previously perhaps it was very much focused on security. It kind of makes you feel like the UK regulation side of things, where it was always talking about, oh, we're doing this for safety, and then everyone was like, well, show us the evidence of the safety, and it started switching to other things, and they started using other taglines for their releases and public consultations.
I noticed Jonathan Webb in the chat. Is national security really a concern if current drones aren't going to be grounded?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly. And that was always one of the things that a lot of American viewers have pointed out to us from the point of view of, if they're that bad, surely you have to get rid of all of them straight away. And I understand that that's that step over. But if you look at the other acts, the Drone for First Responders Act, which is going to slowly but surely eradicate Chinese drones from the market by basically placing extreme tariffs over a period of years, ending up actually putting tariffs on even the smallest Chinese parts. Of course, they are then expecting American companies to say, hey, we'll produce those just as cheap. I wonder where we'll make them. But yeah, which is bizarre. But the economy is now starting to come into into the narrative more. And I wonder if that's because it's more accepted that actually, we're trying to save jobs, we're trying to do this. And I'm talking about the non-drone market out there, of course. Yeah. We are a drone channel and support drone use, etc. I'm a channel partner. We're a partner with this brand here in the UK. So it's one of those things where I do wonder if a lot of this narrative is set for the wider public, of course, in terms of getting that messaging across, in terms of votes and everything else that all these people are worried about. Yeah. And it's a shame, because it does start to muddy the waters. There was a letter that was put out a couple of months ago now, which was actually a call officially to Congress and the Senate to ask for the security, the so-called security information to be released. Because again, we're told there are other reasons why people should be very worried about this company, but it's never released. And I know we don't get to know everything, but if you want to change the fundamentals of an entire industry of billions of pounds worth of turnover and everything, I think that we as the public are due, and the American public especially, are due to have that explained to them personally.
And there are options. If you're worried about critical infrastructure, hey, don't let people fly over critical infrastructure. You are in control of that. Hey, you've got RID now, so you can definitely control it. My understanding is that, if you fly over critical infrastructure in the States, then you can get into trouble. Problem solved. Yes. Don't let people fly over it.
There's this new awesome thing, actually, that if you like someone else's question and you say, oh, that's a good question, it prompts me even more in the chat. I love it. It comes up with a different color. So Michaela Snow saying, oh, that's a good question, Tazzy, prompted both of them to appear. So I was able to jump on it even before we were coming to the chat, actually. But it is a really interesting question. And Tazzy says, yes, to clarify, if it gets passed in the US and the Mini 6 comes out afterwards, can I take it there and fly it? No. It will not have the FCC badge on it. It will not have been cleared for use in the States. Who knows what will happen enforcement-wise? How will this be enforced? How will they know it's a new one, not an old one, from it flying in the air and that type of thing? I know there's obviously signals being emitted, etc., but I think it will become an enforcement nightmare. But strictly, no, would be the simple answer to that particular question. So
I think also the concept of removing competition from an environment to make your own product stronger just doesn't make sense. If there were no lions and hyenas on the savannah, then zebras wouldn't be able to run so fast.
Very good. Now, we hear a lot about China. Separating drones and China for a moment, we hear a lot about China. Indeed, there was a recent open forum with the heads of MI6 and CIA sat on a sofa being broadcast out live on TV, which is the first time that that's happened. So it's good from a point of view of comms and openness to see that happening. Obviously, they're not really going to say too much, are they? But it was identified that China is a significant, one of the, if not the most significant, one of the most significant intelligence challenges, I think they worded it, in terms of trying to be polite, because they still have to work with these people. It's interesting from my point of view that I remember quite strongly when China was the next big friend and was investing everywhere. And, half of London and businesses and this and that, and China investment was being openly welcomed.
Oh, we took the dollars when they had them.
Yeah.
And, those dollars were being given to them by Americans buying all their goods. They'd become the world's factory. It was their turn.
That's it, exactly. And I know things change, and I know there are reasons why they're more of a threat now than they have been. And some of the things that I hear from the Chinese government and in terms of intelligence services, etc., does certainly concern me. But, are we saying that UK and US governments aren't doing these kind of things and that type of thing? And also, yes, we're concerned about that. But what does that got to do with these drones and this drone company? Well, now, there is, of course, the background that there is legislation in place in China, recent legislation, 2014 and 2017, I believe, are the dates. I may have now formed my own folklore on those dates, but they were certainly in the teens. So recent law, this is an ancient law, that actually basically prevents an individual, a resident of China, from refusing to spy on behalf of the state. Yes. And also that a business above a certain size has to open their books and has to work in collaboration, is the word, with intelligence services. So we don't quite have that level here in the West, in the UK and the US, in terms of the open legislation insisting people work on behalf. But again, I'm not so naive as to think very large corporations haven't partly got where they are through the help of government and intelligence. Yeah, exactly. It certainly, I'm sure it can certainly help them. So it's interesting from that point of view. And then, of course, you look at the fact that DJI are such a large company. If they're subject to these things, then okay. But we don't see any evidence of actually how that's impacting things. Does that make sense? So yeah. I hear all of these things and I'm very worried about them. I'm very, very concerned. And I read a lot of background on these topics and I do become concerned. It concerns me on other things like the app not being on Google Play and that type. It's a very small one, but I don't like the fact that I have to allow any company to download whatever they want to on my phone to update my app and that type of thing, because it's not available from the official Android store. So that kind of thing concerns me. But again, it doesn't jump to the point where I think, okay, this is a very bad company and we should ban the product, because surely we should therefore be banning any Chinese electronics that have any kind of capability of surveillance.
Yeah, absolutely, and we were discussing before. Anything that can link to a wireless network should be banned.
Yes,
because that could create a backdoor.
Yeah, so there is something, and I think it's to do with in my opinion, I think it's to do with the public kind of disquiet and lack of trust completely in drones and why people are flying drones. You look at Jeremy Clarkson thinks we're all perverts, basically. So
you say drones, I say Chinese spy drones.
Yes, that's right, exactly. So I think that they're definitely using that kind of narrative, that kind of feeling that the public already have, aren't they? Really?
Yeah, the language in there was quite amusing. Forced to rely on Chinese manufactured drones. No, nobody has ever had a gun put to their head and told to fly a DJI drone.
No, that's right.
Go and fly whatever drone. I sort of think that if the FBI had drones in the air at a certain rally recently, it's quite possible they may have spotted somebody on a roof with a gun.
Quite possibly.
No drones there.
Yes.
And possibly no drones, because they'd be in the middle of a process of, we can't use DJI. What drones are we going to use? Let's go and look at some American ones.
That's it. And I've said for a while now that I think the reason that we don't have other major companies in the drone space heavily is more actually to do with the fact that we have a situation where we have such unreliable regulation. There is no other industry like it, where a large electronic manufacturer wants to start making TVs or start making computer consoles, the way that Microsoft came into the marketplace.
Yeah.
There are rules and regulations on how they have to produce these things, how they market them, all of it. There's regulations right down to the finer points. Those rules and regulations are actually pretty consistent.
Yeah,
you haven't had a year go by in drones where
you don't need a license. You don't need to give up personal information to go and buy one. Although once you've got a computer, you obviously give it all your information.
Yes, that's right. Yes,
all the time.
It already knows all that stuff. Yeah,
but you don't need to register with the government to go and buy a computer. If you did, I think people would be up in arms, wouldn't they?
They would, absolutely. And I think it's an interesting side of things that I think it's where does this go from the point of view of restricting a giant and having something like the DFR come in where they want to put heavier and heavier levies on Chinese drones, then parts of Chinese drones, and then even down to Chinese chips, that they think that and also subsidizing and providing tiny amounts of money in comparison to probably DJI's monthly development bill, let alone what they spend in a year, but tiny amounts. Do they really think that all these large American companies are going to jump in and want to produce a Mini 4 when, here in the UK, the entire category that you fly things as a recreational pilot is currently up in the air and being changed again for like the third time in a few years, and it's going to be changing fairly dramatically with things like remote ID. So we don't know, if we don't know, then how can large corporations come in? And I don't get how understand how restricting a monopoly could, but it isn't really a monopoly in terms of, Microsoft on the computer side of things. I don't think in those terms, it's a monopoly because they are so far ahead of anybody else, and they're the only ones interested in riding the roller coaster that is worldwide drone regulation.
And it's
it comes back to your economies of scale thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's go forward 5 years' time and compare the drones we'll be flying everywhere else in the world with the drones they'll be flying in America. They will not be as good. They'll probably still be flying because this is a nice way for DJI to just keep making money from the investment they've already put into the Mavic 3, the Mini 4, probably the Mini 5. They'll get that in before the bill passes. So they can just keep churning those, and everybody can keep using that old Mavic 3 tech while we're on Mavic 6 and doing wonderful things.
Yes, no, exactly. Which is it's a very small silver lining to a very dark cloud, and perhaps even in that time, something can be done to reverse these things or change and that type of thing. You never know. These things move very slowly, especially when new legislation comes in. It can be very difficult to get a government to back down on something. But what I also find interesting is that there was another piece of legislation that was forwarded in the House, which was another one of, as it's titled here, Stepanics Foreign Adversary Communications Transparency Act passes the House. So, and I'm not going to delve into that at all, even reading the title on it. It is obvious that the anti-China narrative is something that she feels passionately about for whatever reason that might be. So it's an interesting one from that point of view, that this isn't the only piece of legislation that went through yesterday on behalf of this particular politician. So I think it's interesting.
Do you think she had a bad prawn in a chow mein one day? So she's just taken against the whole country.
That's terrible. To me, the issue that we have here is that there are some things about DJI I don't like. There are some things I really don't like. There are a lot of things about the Chinese government that I don't like and that I wouldn't welcome into my own life and that I worry about their own people for. There's stuff about my own government, etc. But I don't see the link yet. I don't see the link. And in terms of people ask me, do I think this could happen in the UK? And this is obviously a good topic for us to chat about for just a couple of minutes, from the point of view that I don't personally think it is something, even when things like Huawei were happening and that type of thing, although we were about to have Huawei build an essential part of our telecommunications network, including emergency services, and actually partly that the intelligence services would be using, which is not a good idea, full stop, which was stopped at the last minute at probable high expense. But Yeah, we haven't gone as far as banning Huawei or anything else like that, even though they've been found to be, significantly acting against interests in a very different way to DJI globally. So it's not something that I think is happening here. You do have issues in terms of the RAF in the UK. They will not let you fly within one of their aerodrome restriction zones if you've got a Chinese drone. It can be difficult to get permission. So they're obviously worried about data and data going back and that type of thing. But again, that could be seen as an over cautious reaction to something, couldn't it? Rather than necessarily being because they have evidence or anything.
Yeah, and we've got the National Security Act in place, so that helps us protect our critical infrastructure or security issues. So essentially, they'll be open to get all the pictures of bin stores and sheds in the UK.
That's it.
To which they're very well.
They'll be able to see the back of my Mini as I take off several times, but and then yes, some random spot that someone's paying me to capture. But it is a strange thing, and but again, there's ways of doing that. There's ways of ring fencing things in terms of data and everything else like that. But it never seems to be the conversation that we want to go down. And no matter how many times we ask for the information and we ask for the open conversations, which is certainly on a channel like this, we're 100% willing to listen to all sides. But we don't get it. And instead we get the kind of narrative and the kind of rhetoric that Alise Stepanics gave in that video, which felt extreme. Even if I was to take everything negative that I think about that could be wrong with DJI is wrong with DJI, it still doesn't reach the benchmarks that she's explaining in that speech. And I know politicians have to do that. I know they have to egg it a little bit more to, build themselves up, and different countries have different styles of doing that. I don't think you'd necessarily get that in the UK Commons these days, but I know that happens. But to get to that point, it's like an extreme step, isn't it? Where you're like, hang on a minute, how did you get there?
Yes.
How is this some kind of total evil system?
And why those? And I think it is, as you say, it's because they fly and have a camera. Yeah, which is far less using a camera on the ground in, say, a mobile phone or a CCTV system or any other method of watching or listening to what we're doing. Not that I think people are particularly, other than Amazon, who keep advertising the last thing I said to me the very next day.
It's like it's an interesting thing as well, because this is a fight that's being brought to us, and a fight that is going to obviously impact people personally across the United States. It is also something that you think is actually, it's just such a weird and interesting position to have reached. And it feels strange. But in terms of the UK position, we're aware that there was a police efforts in terms of a review, in terms of the drones they're using. And of course, the China question would have come into that. I'm not aware of any negative outcomes from that. And I'm not aware of any particular head of steam behind anything here in the UK EU. In terms of what we see out there in our work on behalf of the channel, etc., we don't really hear, DJI from anybody, let alone anything of this nature.
No. There's nothing apart from, as you say, the RF issues, which okay. I think if anybody has an ANAFI USA, they can rent it out to various professional operators across the year when they find themselves flying in that sort of area.
No, indeed, and long live freedom. You have thank you for coming along. And you have posted a few comments of this style. Why would you want to make one of the largest countries in the world super rich so that they can develop a super strong military to intimidate everyone else? I agree with that. I agree with that sentiment. I agree with that in terms of it is almost a beast that we have created ourselves. But as I say, I'm old enough that I remember, I don't need to be old enough because it wasn't that long ago, I'm not that old, that we were actively promoting China as an investment opportunity to large businesses and to property portfolios here in the UK, to pension portfolios. And those links are still pretty much, webbed together at the moment. If you separated all of that finance at the moment, I think we'd have significant problems. So I just don't, I have trouble in terms of linking this kind of issue, which I can see a problem with, just with drones. in terms of,
Yeah.
and again, even though DJI is a big company and it's billions of pounds, of dollars, etc., that isn't a drop in the ocean, really, in terms of, the entire economy that's being poured into there from the world. Graham said it earlier to me before we came on air. There are so many countries out there that DJI sell to. And America, I think, is something like their third largest marketplace. So this isn't, and you said it on air tonight as well, this isn't the only place they sell to, or the only place they design their drones for. And it's a huge economy that the world are paying into them, basically. So it isn't just a thing from that point of view. And as Drone 360 Steve Day is saying, where's her proof that DJI is guilty of gathering sensitive information? We're waiting. There were hacks, and I think this is where DJI do start to lose some of their seriousness and credibility in terms of their responses. There have been hacks of servers and that type of thing, where it was found that actually a tiny photo was taken every X amount of time, and that did go back with the flight data to China, and actually for some random reason that photo became much bigger in size, etc. So there are definitely issues, and there have been issues, and of course there are things that have happened in the past that they denied at the time, then have come out and they've said, okay, we've changed that. Well, what else is happening that we don't know about? So but I do agree with you. We cannot be expected as public to back something that we don't get the evidence of. I mean, could you imagine, I don't know, like a campaign to leave a certain organization without any real evidence to back it up? I mean, where would that go? I'm going to move on very quickly.
Oh, you are brave.
Fly Tuck, I think there's more issues requiring our intellectual attention. See the on-runway collision in Atlanta today. Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. There are, and we've said this recently about our own regulator, the CAA here in the UK, that there are things happening where there are incidents happening with drones and they do nothing about and they don't talk about, yet they spend all their time wanting to pull us up and to regulate and to emphasize points that are theoretical that could happen one day. It's a strange feeling from that point of view. And John could be just letting someone know that DJI's goggles are FCC licensed, so yes, probably still sell goggles alone directly unlicensed. Yeah, and again, in the FPV side of things, there are a good amount of products that go into the US and the UK and Europe that don't have the marks on them, that haven't gone through the licensing and testing. So I'm sure that market will still exist. Dan the Drone Man, good to see you. How does she think DJI are receiving this infrastructure information? I was just explaining part of that. The drone doesn't have a SIM chip in it, so anything's stored in the micro SD. It's got a lot better as well, I have to say, since I would say around 2016, 2017 mark, which again was obviously a much more, a less serious time in terms of the tech behind it. Let me just check here. That was Tazzie's good question. Thank you, Tazzie, for that. Yes, and John QP saying, as I was mentioning in my talk earlier, that there was a request by Homeland Security Chair to have a meeting to release, declassify whatever they have on DJI. I wonder whatever happened with that. And it's an interesting one, isn't it, John? Because it's that kind of thing that you would hope would get listened to, and that they would say, okay, let's release the information. But is there also a potential there from the point of view of how do you convince someone that something's there that's not there? Well, you say, let's have a meeting about this thing that doesn't exist. And then if the meeting doesn't happen, did it ever exist? How deep down the rabbit hole do you want to go to? And to me, how deep that rabbit hole is, show me the evidence, basically.
But of course, politicians are always looking for ways to get popular things through. And in this case, you need something unpopular. You need an unpopular target, yes. And drones are unpopular with probably probably not the majority of people, but people will make a noise about not liking drones.
Yeah,
most people just go along and ignore drones, but ignoring things doesn't get any attention.
Yeah, absolutely. The non-drone public, I think the largest area of cross-section that comes across other feelings about drones is suspicious. So I think some people are anti them, some people just don't know about them. But if you talk to the public about it, I think a lot of people are suspicious.
And And if you're in the public eye and a senator or somebody in government, then you might feel a little bit more sensitive about somebody flying a drone anywhere near you or your family, which could be completely innocent and probably is, but it's a drone and it's pointed at us and we're special. It's a spy drone.
Exactly. Neil Carter is asking, has China banned Microsoft? No, it seems the mistrust one-sided. No. However, a lot of Chinese companies have now stopped their employees bringing Apple phones to work with them and that type of thing, because it's obviously seen as despite the fact that it's probably produced closer to them than it is to anybody at Apple HQ. But yes, obviously the tech is controlled by an American company. So yes, there is mistrust there on both sides, most certainly. Absolutely, technician. That's 100% correct, actually. And I'm seeing technician, one of our new members in the chat, who was also a winner on our DJI show. We've just bundled all that stuff together, so that's going out in the post very soon. I can't remember what you won, technician, but I know you won something, so I ticked you off my list. But yes, the Chinese have cheap and efficient labour. You were saying UK do not, and that is really one of the big issues there, isn't it? When it comes down to economy and getting people working on this, because we can design a wonderful drone here in the UK, but do we have the infrastructure and the ability to produce it?
To be fair, I suspect DJI have taken an awful lot of labour out of the manufacturing. I mean, a few years ago, the video came out of one coming off the end of the production line and essentially test flying itself. These guys are not reliant on hand placing components. There'll be some labour in assembly, but there'll be an awful lot of that automated.
Yes,
because that's even cheaper than people.
No, exactly, and it is just. It's one of those questions where you can go down both rabbit holes and almost convince yourself both ways that DJI being picked on here and that DJI are terrible. But the problem is, of course, is that what we rely upon in terms of the legislation side of things, and we're not talking about guidance. We're not talking about the FCC coming out with some guidance saying they're worried about DJI and we think X, Y, Z. I'm okay with someone wanting to give me some guidance, their opinion. Have you thought of? And as a journalist, as somebody, as a writer, I like to think that I take all views on board. However, when it comes to legislation, I want to see evidence, if that makes sense. Yeah. And I want to see it as absolutely unquestionable evidence as well. That this is exactly as John Cooper was saying before with the call for a meeting to declassify information that is allegedly held. That's the kind of thing that we need to happen in terms of getting people behind it. But without that, you're always going to look like this is an economic thing, particularly if the other act that is part of this family, the DFR, is 100% about tariffs and swinging things across to American-made companies. And in her own release, she talks about that now. So it's a difficult one.
And these things do have impact. In my day job, I'm buying a component at the moment which is effectively being caught up by all the various sanctions. It's a medical grade DC-DC converter. Ooh. Medical grade. It goes into medical equipment, which you now have to wait another 12 weeks to get if you want to build your piece of equipment, because it's the company making it said, no, sorry, America's not buying it. Therefore, they're getting them made elsewhere, but they've got to reset up the factory, reset up the line and make them somewhere else. So every bit of medical equipment relying on that piece of that small component is waiting.
Incredible. So there are some talking points on this. That was, if you've come late, if you rewind to the start, we always try to put the actual story of what's happening at the beginning. It is this, if I bring this web back up, he says, I normally do that far more smoothly, don't I? And I pressed the wrong web as well, actually. There we go. It is this HR 2864 countering CCP Drones Act is now showing on the congress.gov site as passed the House, which happened via a voice vote. That sounds very convenient, doesn't it, by the way? Yesterday it was at 4. If we look at the actions, I think it was at 4:30 in the afternoon, local time. Yes, it was agreed to without objection and action by the House of Representatives. So that has now passed into the House. Now, as I stated as well, it looks like, looking at the PR that was put out by Alise Stepanics' main X account, this is her X account for her work as representative, it is basically calling upon the Senate to include this legislation in their National Defense Authorization Act. So whether or not they've passed this as well, and they've changed it slightly, obviously, but whether or not they've passed this in terms of, look, this is coming anyway, so you need to put it in the larger National Defense Authorization Act or not, I'm not sure. It's going to be an interesting one to see how that plays out, because I don't know whether or not they've got the time to get 2864 through the Senate, through everything else that needs to happen before the election.
Yeah.
So yes. So, and hey, this could even be, part of in my mind earlier is that this could even be the last hurrah for Alise Stepanics before the election, etc. And this could be seen as something, rubber stamping her work on the time, give her a win in the House, but it might not go any further. So it's going to be very interesting. As I said in the main story, the roller coaster that we're on with this story, I don't think is over. So this isn't doom and gloom. This isn't it's all over, but it is a very serious step forward, and no longer can we sit by and say this isn't going to happen. This can't happen, because it's happening basically.
I guess write to your representatives if you don't want it to happen. Any pressure you can put on. Right
to your Senate representatives now. It is something that obviously, and many people, as somebody said in the chat earlier, we can't say that we haven't been told to write to their representatives, because it's something that the drone channels have been putting out there very effectively, and across Facebook and X and everything else like that. So it's been a very effective campaign, and I do hear changes when we're doing the research for this story, when we're speaking to people the other side of the pond. I do hear changes in the narrative and being put down to people contacting them. So it definitely has an impact, and obviously these elected officials, you would hope, would want to know if something is going to significantly affect their constituents. So excellent.
Isn't there a vote coming up
in which
in America?
Is there? I'm not sure. There is a very serious election going on.
I might be thinking about the one we had, but
no, indeed, yes, there is a very serious election coming up.
Now's the time to sway people's opinions. I guess they want every vote.
Yeah, and you just don't know
if you're in a swing state. If you're in a swing state, write to your representative.
Yeah, and with this kind of thing as well, as I say, you just don't know what's going on in the background in terms of this going through for other reasons and won't actually go anywhere else, etc., and that type of thing. You just don't know what's going on until we actually get there. So yes. Now we didn't touch much on the Skydio thing, and obviously there is that issue from the point of view that one of her staffers is a former Skydio employee and that type of thing, and I'm aware of the lobbying and everything in there. But obviously lobbying is an argument that you can put both sides. The main thing we need to keep this down to is where the evidence is and what that evidence actually links to, and whether that is substantial enough to take an entire large-scale business out of Americans' lives, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And and just the capability that those drones afford people, do either for a hobby, which I is probably less important, and I will be hung from the gallows for that. But for industry,
you're allowed an opinion. I think, are we? Hang on, I think someone in the chat earlier said I might get arrested for having an opinion, but yes. Excellent. Okay, well, before I get myself in huge trouble, thank you, Graham, for joining us. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.
Really big crowd. Please hit that like button as you're leaving. We'll see you next time on Geeksvana Live. Anyone that's getting the Neo in the UK, go watch the Neo drone rules video. And we've got some CAA drone delivery Central London shenanigans coming up on the channel very soon with myself and Graham. So we'll see you soon. And as usual, I'll leave the last word to Graham and his shirt.
Leave it to the shirt. Let the shirt say it all. There you go.
Sean out. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.